So the day is Saturday, March 24th. It is 3 p.m. We are 200 miles east of Los Angeles in a place called the Mojave Desert. Or maybe I'm pronouncing that wrong. But here we are on the site where Mike Hughes is about to set out to prove his beliefs true once and for all. Mike Hughes, a 61-year-old limousine driver, has decided that he is going to fly his steam-powered rocket that he built into the sky to finally prove that the Earth is flat. So, here he comes down. He's been working on this for 4 years. He gets in and takes off. Goes 350 miles per hour. Reaches a height of 1,875 feet, which is frankly a lot more than most people thought he was going to get. And I think a lot of us can hear a story where we hear about Mike Hughes and go, you decided to fly a rocket in the sky to prove the Earth was flat because you wouldn't believe what everyone else has told us for so many years. To Mike, to other flat earthers, they look at the Earth and say, well, everything we've been able to see so far, as high as we get, no curve. So they're not exactly buying this whole round Earth thing. What he realizes is that, he needs to get a larger perspective of the Earth, and maybe then it'll go okay. After reaching his height of 1,875 feet, after about a minute, his parachutes both mostly open, and he only makes a slightly hard landing with some slightly moderate to severe injuries. When asked about his flight, Mike says, I'm really glad that I did it because a lot of people said I wouldn't do it, and I did. Though, I can't really tell. I'm going to have to wait until I can get 52 miles up in the sky. Then I'll be able to tell, once and for all, if this Earth is really flat. And so, he's waiting for the day where hopefully, he said, by the end of this year, he'll be launched 52 miles up this time, which is far, far, far beyond anything he previously accomplished with 1,875 feet. But this whole goal, his whole direction to solidify his beliefs really boils down to his understanding that he doesn't see a big enough picture. And sometimes I feel like, even though my goals aren't the same as his, maybe I don't see a big enough picture as well. In my life, I get so caught up in everything going on here and now at this level that I don't really worry about the bigger world. There's this whole world of things going on, and I'm like, well, who's going to care about all this world? I don't have time for that. There's so much going on in the U.S. with shootings and this and that. I can't worry about wars in other countries. But then I don't take time to worry about the stuff going on in this country as much as I should either. Because how can I worry about all that stuff when I have so much crazy stuff going on in my own life? And I get very narrowed down and focused in on what's happening today. I don't look at what's happening 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I get stuck in trying to move forth in the comforts for now without really seeing this bigger picture. And maybe some of you have this relating sense to what I'm saying, where you feel like this can be you at times. You get so caught up in today and the things that you need right now that you don't take time to actually look at the bigger picture, look at the grander narrative. And when we get to this section in our scripture that we've been looking at, I think we can see someone who relates exactly to this need to see something bigger that they might be missing out on. Now, here we come to the story of Ruth. Here we get to drop down into this section to pull out from it this need to be able to understand what we're missing out on the bigger picture. And we come into Ruth in chapter 4 here in the middle of a cliffhanger. So I want to take a second and say, this is what's going on. Why is it a cliffhanger? Because chapter 3 didn't end up all nice and neat. See, in chapter 3, verse 12 and 13, we get this moment between Boaz and Ruth, when Boaz says, now it's true that I'm a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight and in the morning, and if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he's not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning. Instead of this beautiful ending right at the end of chapter 3, where he gets to come in and redeem and everything's happily ever after, we all of a sudden get stuck up on this new person that enters the narrative that can kind of ruin everything. And that's where we get to start off with Boaz in chapter 4 here, because he now needs to go talk to this Redeemer. Now, as we get in this text here, I just want to read it for us really quick. But as I'm doing that, I know this is a bit much to ask for, but I am the fourth sermon of the day, so you're going to give me a little leeway. Please stand with me and read it silently as I read it out loud. Ruth chapter 4. Now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, turn aside, friend, sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down, and he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down here. And so they sat down. And then he said to the Redeemer, Naomi, who has come back from her country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belongs to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those who are sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. If you will not, tell me, that I may know, and for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you. And he said, I will redeem it. Then Boaz says, the day you buy the field from the hands of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. Then the Redeemer said, I cannot redeem it. For myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem it. Now this was the custom in the former times in Israel concerning the exchanging, to confirm a transaction that one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was the manner of attesting in Israel. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, buy it for yourself, he drew off his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and to the people, you are witnessing this day that I have bought the hand of Naomi, and all that belonged to Elimelech, and all that belonged to Chilion and to Mahlon. Also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers, and from the gate of his narrative place. You are witness this day. Then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, we are a witness. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together build up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem, and may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the woman said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a redeemer. May his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you is more to you than 7 sons, and has given birth to him. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the woman of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. They call his name Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. I just want to take a second to pray. God, thank you so much that we can come here and read this story, God, and get to hear all that you have for us. I really pray that you can be with me as I tell the story, as you can use me as your vessel to hopefully communicate your truths. God, I just pray that I would be out of the way and that this story could be your story for us and for our lives. And as you just give us this peace to be in the moment, I just pray that you would bless this time together. In your powerful name, in the name of Jesus, amen. Please be seated. So, now that we've seen the story, we start up on this scene. Boaz is sitting by the city gates. And in this day, the city gate was where all the business happened. This is where the show happened. And he's sitting there, and the Redeemer, whom is not named in the passage, and it's kind of weird that he's not named, because actually as we look at the passage, it goes out of its way to not name him. And we'll see why. So he who must not be named is walking upon Boaz. We'll call him Voldemort for our sake. So Voldemort is walking to Boaz, and Boaz is sitting there. He says, "Come aside, friends. We need to talk." I don't know about you guys in your lives. Today in our connotation, we get very uncomfortable when someone's like, "Hey, we need to talk. Do you have a minute?" Like, my heart stops when I hear that. And it doesn't really matter who's saying it to me. In this day, I'm pretty sure when Boaz says this to Voldemort, he kind of has a sense that something's going on. They're at the city gates. I don't think that it doesn't seem like there's that much normal interaction between these two. And he's being pulled aside, and it says Boaz has gathered 10 men to witness. So Voldemort knows that something official is going to happen here. Because gathering 10 witnesses, that's like today us having our lawyer and maybe a notary on hand. I mean, this is where something official will happen. And in the midst, Boaz is going to present to Voldemort's chance to be the kinsman redeemer that his honor position has called him to be. Now, some people look at this story and look at how Boaz handles this and says, man, he was being tricky. He totally tricked him out. I disagree. I don't think Boaz had any deceitful intention. Even though oftentimes that's the way this story is looked at. And here's why. As we look into this story, there are two pieces of information that are given. The first piece of information is this information that this land has become available to be redeemed. And the second piece of information is that this woman has become available to be redeemed. And he talks about the land first, and people are like, he must be hiding the woman, but here's why I don't think that's the case. It's because in that culture, as sad as it is to say, the land was a bigger priority. Because with greater land, all of a sudden you expand upon how much wealth you can make when you're a farmer. And that's why when Voldemort first is told about the land, he is interested. This is something he's invested in. He's like, oh, I can get more land from what Elimelech had? Sure, sounds great, let's do it. Boaz then goes on to tell them about Ruth. And I don't think that Boaz had been hiding her, because Boaz doesn't leave back any information in either part. And if I were going to deceive Voldemort here, I would start with the part he didn't want to hear so that he wouldn't be interested in the rest. I wouldn't have started with the good news and then given him the conditional clause afterwards. I would have said, hey, you might not be interested because of this and this and this, but here's this opportunity. For me, if I was going to try to deceive him, I'd work the other way. And furthermore, back to chapter 3, in that verse 13 we looked at in setting up the story, Boaz says, if he will redeem you, good, let him do that. Boaz wants to redeem Ruth. He really does. He has a desire to do this. But he also has this honorable character that we've seen throughout the story. He has this honorable character where he's like, I don't really know what's going to happen here. God's calling me to do the right thing, and instead of trying to hide it, trying to run away with it, trying to just let Voldemort not know about it and do it on his own. Boaz says, I'm going to do what's right. I'm going to go. I'm going to present this. And hopefully, it'll come back to me in a way that I'm able to be the Redeemer myself. But he doesn't know that. He's giving up his control over this situation to be the Redeemer. And what we see here as a response of Voldemort in not wanting Ruth is actually kind of a response out of this selfish desire. Now, I think sometimes we get this misunderstanding of why on earth he would be required to even marry her, because it kind of makes a jump in the text where it says, and obviously this means he's required to marry her. So to actually take a look at that, I want to, if everyone could just put a finger here, and let's turn to Deuteronomy chapter 25 really quick. Because here in Deuteronomy chapter 25, we actually get a read really quick about the law concerning what's called this levirate marriage. I think it's important knowing in this context because when the original audience would have known about this as well. So in verses 5 through 10 it says, if brothers dwell together and one of them dies and has no son, and the wife of the dead man shall not be married outside the family to a stranger, her husband's brother shall go into her and take her as a wife and perform the duties of a husband's brother to her. And the first son whom she shall bears shall succeed the name of his dead brother, and his name may not be blotted out of Israel. If that man does not wish to take his brother's wife, then the brother's wife shall go to the gates to the elders and say, my husband's brother refuses to perpetuate his brother's name in Israel. He will not perform the duties of a husband's brother to me. Then the elders of the city shall call to him and speak to him. And if he persists on saying, I don't wish to take her, then the brother's wife shall go up to him and in the presence of the elders and pull his sandal off his foot and spit in his face. And she shall answer and say, so shall be done to the man who does not build up his brother's house. And the name of his house shall be called Israel, the house of him who had his sandal pulled off. So, odd custom, but here's the case. When Elimelech died, his name, the honor of his household was going to die with him. Because if we're just going to look at Naomi, she has reached the age where she is too old to bear sons. And therefore, she doesn't really qualify for this levirate marriage. But because Ruth does qualify, and she is in the line, she now qualifies that when the land gets redeemed, the honor of this levirate marriage should be fulfilled with it. And all of a sudden, Voldemort over here, he's like, man, if I decide to marry that Moabite woman, all of a sudden, all of my property is going to have to be split up between her sons and my sons. All of the money I could be gaining that I would normally have just gotten with the land is now going to be used against me because all of a sudden I'm having to split my estates. I'm having to take on this debt of buying the land. This isn't looking as good as it should for me. And furthermore, I'd be marrying this outsider, this foreigner, and how would I be looked at in society married to this foreigner? I mean, the Israelites and the Moabites, if you read through Scripture, they didn't get along exactly. And that's kind of an understatement here. And yet here we are in this place where Voldemort, he's saying, goodness, I can't let this happen because it would ruin my own inheritance. And everything I want right now would be taken away from me. So he passes. Voldemort was the first redeemer because he had that position. But he was a false redeemer. That's something that's going to be important. When we move on in the story, and Boaz, because of this, gets to, in fact, redeem her as he wanted. And we see that Boaz becomes a real redeemer, as opposed to this false redeemer who is only looking out for himself and not willing to follow through with the honors of that society. We now get to Boaz, who has taken that aside, and he says, you know what? I want to step into this situation because this is something I can do for them. I can be the redeemer in this instance, and it's a beautiful thing that we get to look at Boaz for doing this. As he takes this time to become a redeemer, in the text it says, the transaction happened when Voldemort drew off his sandal and gave it to the other with that manner attesting in Israel. It sounds kind of familiar. When we look at the levirate marriage thing, this was a part of that, if you look. This kind of idea of a finalized agreement, and they're related. And normally it's a sign of essentially disrespect and dishonor that would come upon Voldemort, but in the society of the judges that we're in, everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And there's not really this association on him as much, but there is a great celebration on what Boaz is doing. Because what Boaz is doing is he's taking Ruth and Naomi, these women who didn't have a way out, and he is sacrificing this debt that he is having to take on for them to give them something. But he's not the only redeemer that we're going to find here. And I think that's so amazing because a little bit further on, we get this picture of how there's a secret redeemer. Starting in verse 13, it says, so Boaz took Ruth, she became his wife. He went into her, and the Lord gave her conception. She bore a son. Then the woman said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. And he shall be to you a restorer of life and nourish your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you is more than 7 sons. Ruth is a redeemer to Naomi in the story as well. Because Naomi had nothing. She didn't have a way out. And Ruth didn't exactly know how she was going to give Naomi anything, but Ruth was willing to give up everything to help her. And God uses Ruth to fulfill the emptiness that we have seen in Naomi throughout this story. When she's lost everything, here we have this moment when she's holding her grandson. Over the last couple of weeks have been kind of crazy in my own life. 2 weeks ago, I was with my girlfriend's family, and by the bedside of her dying younger brother. He had cerebral palsy and he was coming to the end of his life. And he's been on hospice since the beginning of the semester. And it was 2 weeks ago, a few days before his passing, that we're sitting by his bedside and the whole family's gathered around. And in that moment when everything seems so dark, the oldest brother, we find out that him and his wife are pregnant. And the news kind of came out as an accident. The mom guessed it randomly, the grandma, which will to be. And they're like, yeah, but we didn't want to tell you guys in the midst of this hard time. And the mother of the youngest son, her name's Grace, and she says, you don't realize this is the perfect time because this is exactly the news we need right now. In the midst of losing everything, in the midst of coming to this emptiness, we see that God is still fulfilling that emptiness. And in this case, with a grandson-to-be, and in Naomi's case, with a grandson that came and was there on her lap, even after everything. And it's amazing, it's beautiful, but she's not the only redeemer either. We had a false redeemer. We had Boaz, the official redeemer. We had a secret redeemer, but then also the text keeps hinting at something because it says, Blessed be the Lord who has not left you today without a redeemer. May his name be renowned in Israel. She's talking about the son, Obed, as the redeemer. And almost no one would ever refer to as a baby as the redeemer. He was used in Ruth's redemption, but what we get at is actually taken further as this passage ends with the genealogy leading to David. And the author of this story said, David has been the redeemer for Israel. And God is using the blind faith and crazy obedience of Ruth, of Boaz, and just giving up what they had in their control for him so that he can take it and make something that is beautiful in this moment. And today we can look and say, it didn't stop at David. It went on to Jesus, who's been the Redeemer for everyone. Through this same line, the hope for everyone. And that is what's so great about this passage, is that we see these four redeemers. And you know what? Oftentimes we think, all right, we get this. Jesus redeemed everyone. That's awesome. We want to be like Boaz and Ruth, who give up to God their plans so that he can redeem things. But oftentimes we find ourselves in the spot of the false redeemer, don't we? I threw in Voldemort because I thought that'd be a funny name. But that redeemer's not named. And how true is it that sometimes we could put our own name into this story and watch how his actions would reflect our own? Because we're so concerned with what's happening right now, with what's going on in our own comfort zone, that we fail to acknowledge that God has a bigger picture in mind. And all of a sudden, instead of looking to what God has for us, we are looking to ourselves and we're missing out on something great. Voldemort missed out on being a part of the line of David and the line of Jesus. What are we missing out today? And I have one illustration here that I heard back in youth group, and it drove it home for me in a sense. And it kind of came back to me as I was preparing for this sermon. I want to talk about it. This is a rope, for any of you who are not sure. And I want you guys to imagine that this rope goes on for eternity. Wraps around the world a few times and just goes out to space. Just keeps on going. I want you to imagine that this rope is a timeline. And here we are in our life right here. And we are so concerned with how we can get more money, more comfort, so that we can have a good life when we get to here. And we don't even see all that there is beyond this. Instead of trading our story here for God's eternal story, we live a life where even in our own ministries, we're only focused on what comes next week, on the short-term picture. Even as seminarians, we live a life where we often get so wrapped up in just going from here to here. And this happens on a daily thing, when we, on a regular basis, might choose to follow our own pursuits instead of seeing, maybe, does God want you to evangelize to someone? We get wrapped up in saying, maybe, I'm concerned with the pleasure of this moment watching TV instead of actually hearing how God might be trying to speak to me through his word or through prayer. You know, most surveys show that vast majorities of Christians all feel that they want to pray more, but they just don't make the time for it. And we get so concerned with how we're living our life from here to here that we miss the millions and millions and millions of years that go out here forever and ever and ever that are part of our eternity. Because how we live our lives there affects all of this. And we don't take the time to actually see what this story is all about. This story is about someone who missed their chance to give what they had to God so that he could choose to do with what he wanted with them. This is a story about someone who didn't trade their life, And then a few people who did trade their stories in for God's eternal story.